This is Greg Pasternak from Riverside Life, and today I'm starting a new video series. It's going to be a video series on the diversity of river types in California. I don't want to talk too much about the details of the science. I'll put some of the science in, but let's just look at what are the different kind of rivers of California, and how do we talk about them. I'm outside of Coalinga, California, so it's sort of south central. If you want to look it up on a map, just look for Coalinga and just I'm in that vicinity. And I've headed up just a little bit into the hills, and as you can see behind me and around me, and I'll step out of the way and pan around, what you're going to see is a confined river valley. What do I mean by confined? I mean that there you see the mountain walls around us, so just straight across there you can see that whole rock outcrop. The river is just at the base of that outcrop. And if I scroll around and I look at this side here, you see there's some agricultural land, but again, is a hillside. It's lower on this side, but the whole valley here is confined within this space. So from those hills on the other side to the hilly rangelands on the other side, that is the valley that we have here. It's relatively confined. In front of us is a field, and this field has some riparian vegetation on it, but it's above the bankfull channel, as we would say, the geometric shape of the channel. So it's probably a floodplain, although I can't say explicitly. And then in the distance is the channel. So when we talk about the types of rivers in California or anywhere in the world, we begin by putting the channel of that river into the context. The river is not just the channel, it's the valley context. It's a whole corridor that is present. So in each one of these videos for the series, I'm going to start by presenting something about the valley context, which is usually going to be unconfined, partially confined, or confined, and in this case it's confined, and then we'll move on down into looking at what's going on in the channel itself. I have moved further down the valley, but I'm still here along Los Gatos Creek. But I wanted you to see the contrast between the main site we are focusing on, which is a confined river, and what you have here, which is an unconfined valley. So in the distance, way back there, that's where I came from, and you can see that it's quite mountainous. On the other side of me, there's just sort of some gentle rolling hills, and you can see that right in front of us in the foreground is a wide riparian corridor indicative of moisture conditions. So that probably is functioning floodplain, at least for providing the moisture necessary for those species. And then somewhere down in there is the channel. So here, unconfined means that the valley sides, walls or whatever is out there, hill slopes, that they're far away from where the channel is. Why does that matter? Because confinement plays a big role in the flood processes. When all this stuff goes underwater in an unconfined valley, the water's going to be getting out of the channel really quickly and spreading out over a really large area. That means that it's going to be dissipating the energy, depositing sediment, and creating a variety of habitat refugia for different organisms. Whereas when you're in a confined valley, that energy remains focused, eroding the bed, pushing organisms down the system, and basically just acting as conveyance, erosion and transport, whereas here we would be in a more depositional environment. So that just gives you a little bit of a feel of the difference between confined, partially confined, and unconfined valleys as we look through these different channel types in the state of California. What are the things that we have to be mindful of as we tour around the state of California and look at the different rivers is the fact that many rivers are on private land. Now there's a lot of rules about what you can or can't access, and I'll probably make that a topic of another video because I've studied a lot about what we call accessibility or just navigability of rivers for tidal purposes or regulatory purposes or otherwise. But as you can see here, the river that we're going to visit right now is largely fenced off and it's behind private land. I'm not going to be violating anyone's personal property rights here or in this video series. I'm going to respect that. But in a case like this, we can find a bridge, and we're going to take a look at what we see from the river from the bridge. I want to show you a channel that there's really a lot to talk about, but I'll try not to get too carried away. But the first thing is that this falls into a class that we would define as confined because the valley is confined, gravel cobble because the substrate that makes up the bed is that size, and that is a really diagnostic character of the things that are going on in a river. And then finally, we describe this as a relatively uniform channel, meaning that the width is not undulating a whole lot and the bed isn't undulating a whole lot. And it's all relative because they are having some undulations. But compared to other rivers in the state, we would call this a confined gravel cobble uniform channel. Now let's just unpack some of the aspects of this particular case. And I might from time to time, zoom in with the camera, but first I just want to present somewhat of an overview. So in considering this channel, one of the remarkable things about working in California, looking at the rivers of California, is that it's so dry. Look at us, it's like, I feel like, where's Clint Eastwood? Where's the gunslingers of the Wild West out here, right? I'm here and it's spring conditions right now. It's beautiful weather, but man, it is just dry. And that's just the nature of these rivers. In the region that I'm at now, here near Coalinga, technically we're in the region that we would consider to be the San Joaquin Tulare region for this classification. But others on this trip I'm going to be looking at are a little bit more to the west along the coast. So we're going to be looking at south central coastal streams later on in this video series. But why does that matter? Well, first of all, California is a big state. It's almost like a country unto itself. There's a lot of countries that wouldn't even capture the diversity of rivers that we have here in California alone. And so based on the kind of geology that's here, the differences in weather, or what we would say like the hydrology or hydrologic regime, the rates of tectonic uplift versus climatic weathering, like these fundamental drivers are so different in different parts of the state that while we do have a statewide classification that tries to integrate all of that, we do have independent classifications to really drill in to see what's going on in a particular region. So for this video, I'm going to be, in this video series, I'm going to be referring to both of these classification systems, the statewide and as well the regional. Sometimes these classifications are going to totally agree, which is happening at this site actually, and other times there might be slight differences because of the way all of the sites analyzed in the state fell out in the analysis. But in any case, I can see I'm already getting too technical. So let's return to this site. So both the San Joaquin Tulare classification for the region and the statewide classification agree. This is a confined river. You see the wall right up against the side there. There's a little bit more width to the valley over here, but as I already showed in the valley context, not a whole lot. So, and then in addition to that, so you come in from the confined, we see the gravel cobble, and it's a relatively uniform condition. When you're looking at bridges, it's a little tricky because we know that there can be some construction at the bridges, and so that can be a problem. Ideally, I'd like to get away from the bridges for more of the videos when possible, but as you can see, as I already mentioned, because of the fencing and we don't want to trespass, then we can't get out to the site. So we actually have two sites where we sent field crews out in previous years, and they got permission from the landowners, I presume, to be able to go out and make all the measurements. So we know exactly what we're looking at for the sites that we're going to be visiting. So, in terms of the uniformity of the site, there's not a whole lot of bed and width undulations here. Notice that there's vegetation encroachment entirely into the channel in this case. Because it's so dry, it's easy for vegetation to get established. But you can imagine every 5 to 10 years, a sizable flood can come through and take all that down. And this is a part of California that's highly sensitive to El Nino, La Nina cycles. And so periodically on that 5 to 10 year basis, we're going to see big floods that will take out that kind of riparian vegetation. Let's just cross the street and take a look at the other side of the river. Okay, so we've crossed over and now you can see the other side here. And, let me just take a quick look here. Yep, we got a pretty good view here. So in this section, one of the things you could see a little bit more into the distance is that the bed includes cohesive mud, and we actually may be getting into some of the underlying hillside here. So that would put some real direct confinement on the channel condition. While there's a little bit of sand and silt, it's just the bed is predominantly gravel and cobble. So you can kind of see on both sides a pretty similar regime to what's going on at this site. I'm at another bridge crossing of this first site that I've been visiting. I think this is actually Los Gatos Creek by name, but I'm not entirely sure. But here you can see, again, the confinement on the right side. Another thing you can see here is there actually happens to be a gauging station. So there's like a corrugated structure in the distance with a little bit of a roof and some solar, and then a line across the channel. That is a gauging station where they can measure the discharge. It's hard to believe that a stream like this would have any flow at all, but there are many lines of evidence of that. And because I can't get down into the channel, I'll have to save that topic for another video. But is this another place where you could see that the channel's about 5 to 6 meters wide. It's got the gravel cobble substrate, and a little bit of the distance you do see a bedrock outcrop on the right because we're impinging up against the hillside, so there is a little bit of confinement there, but there's really not a whole lot of width and bed undulation here. It's a relatively uniform channel, which is why it fits into the confined gravel cobble uniform class. So I've said about everything I want to say for just a general introduction to this kind of site. Visiting the site, I can easily confirm that this is a match between the two classifications of a confined gravel cobble uniform channel. Okay, so we'll see you at the next site.